Hey guys, Nike here, and today I'd like to talk about a topic that I've seen a lot of debate on in stream chats and YouTube comments, and that is what is the sort of build people should run in open world. As someone who makes videos for open world, both for group and solo, it's a subject I take interest in, and I wanted to set the record straight a bit. So I'll come right out and say it. Most of the so-called solo builds, including and especially the ones that I have on my channel, are inappropriate for most players in most situations. It really pains me to say that because I love the way solo builds utilize traits and synergies that you don't see often in group play builds. I love the way solo builds can break the game in such a way that they have incredible sustain and good DPS at the same time, and they let the user solo bosses with ease that are designed for group play. The stuff that Lord Hyzen does with these builds is awesome, and I definitely appreciate the effort that goes into those hard solos and the build craft. But as I said, 99.9% of players should not be playing these builds day in and day out. I don't really want to make too many assumptions about the average player's play patterns and what they are, since there's really no such thing as an average player. But I feel confident in saying that the outrageous stuff like soloing legendary bounty bosses or soloing strike missions is not what the average player does every day. I argue that if players were honest, what most players do in open world is group content. Meta events dominate the play pattern of open world PvE, since that's where the reward structure of open world PvE pushes you. The amount of players at endgame, and I stress at endgame, not leveling, who roam around in the open world looking for, solo content as their primary play pattern is probably close to zero. If you have a goal of soloing a particularly challenging hero point, or even a fractal or a dungeon or a strike mission, you should definitely look into one of these builds that help you to do your project. But the idea that these builds are what you should be using for general PvE is something I strongly disagree with. So what should people run? Frankly, people should run raid builds in open world with a bias towards DPS support hybrids if possible for their class. These builds are designed for group play, which is what most endgame open world is, and by buffing yourself and allies with key boons while still doing reasonable DPS and skimping a little bit on self-sustain. In group scenarios like, for example, Dragon's End or Octovine or Shaq Garrett, self-sustain is largely unimportant because incoming damage is generally low, and because some healers are present, and finally because you can be easily resurrected if you go down. Therefore, unlike solo builds, most of your build power can be dedicated to personal DPS and group buffs, whereas most solo builds self-buff powerfully, but they lack significant buffs for allies and invest too much of their power points into self-sustain. When solo, having 25 perma, might, fury, and quickness is insanely good, but in group play, you get real value from giving these boons to others around you. Even if the players are less skilled, the total group DPS will be significantly higher if you're buffing everyone else as opposed to just buffing yourself. Quick Brand, Quick Herald, Alack Spectre, Alack Renegade, and Alack Mirage. These are the sort of builds that we should see most in open world, because they are the absolute best builds for group success and meta events, and they are good enough for the rare occasion that you have to play solo in all but the most challenging content that requires a specialized build. I think I've laid out the case, but you might be asking why anyone cares what people play. For the most part, it doesn't matter. Since most events are easy enough to win with any build, it really, in that sense, it doesn't matter. But there are situations like Dragon's End where a player on a support hybrid build can affect the outcome of the event by increasing group DPS significantly, and it does matter. But beyond just passing or failing an event, I'd like to mention what I consider to be the most important reason that people should run group support builds, and that is fun. Simply put, group events and the game as a whole is more fun when players have buffs. Anecdotally, I have way more fun at Shaq Garrett when I have full uptime of 11 boons, and I suspect most others do as well. From a community perspective, if we can play builds that allow more players to have more fun, that's a win for the community. Lastly, if the entire community is pushing people towards builds like this, it does create a bit of a stepping stone toward fractals, raids, and strikes by getting people comfortable on the builds that happen to be the most desired builds in any group, as well as simply the most very basic level of teaching players the value of boon buffing. When people suggest to curious players to quote-unquote play whatever in open world, or worse, encouraging them to spend their limited resources gearing up their first character in one of the specialist solo-only builds, they are doing that player a disservice. The TLDR here is that most of the time in the open world you're playing group content, and the best group content builds in the game are raid builds that are support DPS hybrids. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave any comments you'd have below, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I will definitely see you next time.